Are you saying that atheism is just a lack of belief in God?
It is for me, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, well then that would be just a statement about your psychological state.
Yes.
It wouldn't be a statement about the real world.
Well,
Because
no.
this book is an atheist then, because it lacks a belief in God. But
I don't think it makes it difficult to understand. I think it's something which applies to humans. You can call a human an atheist. If you want to call a book an atheist, then be my guest, because by my definition, an atheist is someone who does not believe in God.
Well, let's maybe start with you, Frank, just to lay out, briefly at least, what the case is that you're making on the video that Alex was responding to.
Right, it's a 2-minute video, and I say in the front, you can't cover this whole issue in 2 minutes, but my main point is this, is that if evil exists, then good must exist, and in order for good to exist, God must exist, because by definition, what we mean by good is the nature of God. That's what goodness is. So you can't have evil unless good exists, because evil is a privation or a lack in good. Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of the car, you got a better car. If you take all the car out of the rust, you've got nothing. In other words, evil only exists as a parasite in good. And so I think we all agree evil exists. The question is, if evil exists, then how can it exist unless there's a standard of good? And good won't exist unless God exists. So evil doesn't disprove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but evil doesn't disprove God, because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed. Now, the second question there, of course, is, okay, well, if there is a good God, why would he allow these evil things to occur? That's another question,
right?
Which we spend a lot of time in the book, Stealing from God. But my main point is that if evil exists, God exists. I know it sounds counterintuitive.
It does sound counterintuitive to the average person. They'll say, how do you get from one to the other? But as I understand it, this is if you like, this is the idea of what's often called the moral argument for God. That you, if we all agree that real right and wrong exist, real good and evil exist, then there has to be some kind of a moral lawgiver or some kind of reference frame that beyond just the material universe that a naturalist perhaps believes.
In fact, C.S. Lewis famously said that as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how would I got this idea of justice and injustice? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, injustice can't exist unless justice exists, and justice can't exist unless God exists, because, again, by definition, that's what we mean by justice.
And so it's your view that if an atheist wants to claim that justice and injustice exist, well, they can't really, because that's just, on their framework, an illusion, a kind of just a sort of something that we've come up with as a sort of helpful way of thinking about things, but not something that actually exists objectively.
Right, typically, and I think that's what Alex said in his video, that it's an illusion, that this idea that we have these objective moral values is illusory.
Well, let's come to Alex for this, and we'll try and sort of take the points that you raised in the video in a kind of sequential manner as far as possible, Alex. But let's start at the beginning, because in the video, the first point you wanted to make was that there is this question mark around disproving atheism. That's obviously the title of the video. It may just be that evil disproves atheism. You have a problem with that very concept to start with, don't you?
To an extent, yeah. It's not particularly pertinent to the discussion, but I think it's important to remember that according to me, atheism isn't a worldview. And I know this is something you disagree with, Frank, but the way that people get around this a lot of the time is they'll say, well, many atheists do believe that there is no God. But not all atheists do. So if you meet a person who does believe there is no God, they are an atheist. But that's not what atheism is. That's sort of a subset of atheism. I'm what you might call an agnostic atheist. And a lot of people think that agnosticism and atheism are on the sort of same spectrum, but to me they're absolutely not. Agnosticism, Matt Dillahunty is good on this. Agnosticism is a claim to knowledge. Atheism is a claim to belief. So to say you're agnostic is to say, well, I don't know if there's a God, which I think is the rational position to take. I mean, can anybody really know for sure? And all I'm saying is, because I don't know agnosticism, I therefore don't believe, and that's atheism. But there are people out there who do actively believe there's no God. And those people do have a burden of proof. I mean, people such as, he only did it on one occasion that I've seen, but Christopher Hitchens usually would say, we would never say there is no God. But when talking to William Lane Craig, he said of the Christian God that he is, quite dangerously, I think, but he said that he's in a position where he thinks he can actively say that God does not exist. And in that case, yes, he has a burden of proof. But as far as I'm concerned, atheists in general, or atheism, isn't a worldview and doesn't
isn't something you can therefore disprove in that sense.
Yeah, in the sense, and also atheism, one of the phrases that I've heard you use, Frank, is on atheism, if atheism is true. But to me, atheism isn't something that can necessarily be true or false any more than, say, veganism. Is veganism true? It's not really a case of whether it's true or false. It's a case of the tenets on which you are grounding this veganism is perhaps maybe you think it's wrong to eat animals. That can be true or false. But not objectively, I'd say. But that can be true or false. But then to say, is veganism itself true or false? That doesn't make any sense. It's not whether it's true or false. It's, are you a vegan or are you not?
Okay.
Frank?
Yeah, well, I would say that, are you saying that atheism is just a lack of belief in God?
It is for me, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, but then that would be just a statement about your psychological state.
Yes.
It wouldn't be a statement about the real world.
Well,
Because
no.
this book is an atheist then, because it lacks a belief in God. But then we're really trivializing what the word atheist means then.
Yes.
Because you could say this microphone's an atheist then, if it just lacks a belief in God. So if somebody wants to say that, okay, fine, but I don't see atheists just saying that. What I see is atheists saying, oh, I lack a belief in God, and here's how I explain the universe. Multiple universes, evolution, quantum vacuums, materialism. Well, those are positive beliefs that need to be defended. In other words, you just can't say, I lack a belief in God, and therefore I have no burden of proof to have a conversation about why reality is the way it is. No, if you're going to say that multiple universes or evolution or materialism or quantum vacuums explain how we got here, then it would seem to me you'd need reasons for those. Those are positive beliefs. You see what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. In certain cases. For instance, if you're talking about the variety of life, and somebody says to me that they think it was God, and I said, oh, no, I can explain this through evolution. I suddenly have a burden of proof. I have to
Right.
offer some evidence for that.
Right.
But atheism in general, if you're just an atheist and you're not taking part in debate, I think you don't necessarily have to justify
What
your
do you
position
do
in
with the
same
problem
way.
that makes cats and rocks and microphones atheists as
Well, it depends on your definition. For instance, if we define a vegan as someone who doesn't eat meat, then this book is also a vegan.
Right. Yes, but isn't that the point that makes it difficult to understand what the content is of
I don't
such
think it makes it
such
difficult
a
to understand.
point
I
of view.
think it's something which applies to humans. You can call a human an atheist. If you want to call a book an atheist, then be my guest, because by my definition, an atheist is someone who does not believe in God. And so a book, sure, call it an atheist if you will.
But then we wouldn't have any reason to converse about anything. If you're just saying you lack a belief in God and I don't have any burden of proof to explain reality or why reality is the way it is, then we're not really having a conversation, right?
The idea that good requires God is just a definition, not evidence. You can define anything that way. It doesn't prove it exists. Morality can be explained without religion. Evolutionary biology shows cooperation and empathy helped humans survive. Studies in neuroscience show moral decisions come from brain activity, especially in areas like the prefrontal cortex. Even animals show basic morality, fairness, cooperation, and empathy, without believing in any God. And when you look at the Bible, the moral standard isn't consistent. In 1 Samuel 15:3, God commands the killing of men, women, children, and infants. In Exodus 21, slavery is regulated, not condemned. That doesn't look like a perfect moral foundation. It looks like human culture from thousands of years ago.
Well, there's two types of atheist speakers, you might say. The first is people who will have a burden of proof, who come out and there are two people trying to prove their opposing worldviews against each other. In the other case, there's somebody like me who, in the face of certain aspects of Christianity, I've found to be not particularly compelling or particularly... I'm trying not to use moral terms here, to be very careful. But and so what I will do, my mission isn't...
He's very smart.
My mission is not to come out and convert everyone to atheism. It's rather to say, well, here's a belief system that I don't agree with, and here's why. I'm then leaving it open. Perhaps if I'm debating with a Christian, I might say, well, this is why I think Christianity isn't true. Now go and do your own thing. Maybe you want to be a Muslim. Maybe you want to be an atheist like me.
All right, let me ask you this, though. Let's just say that you say you think Christianity is false because of X, whatever that is, right?
Sure.
Aren't you implying that non-X then is true?
Not necessarily. Again, it's a very subtle distinction between believing there is no God and not believing there is a God. It sounds like the same thing. It sounds like we're being pedantic, but really, in all honesty, it is a semantic thing. It doesn't particularly matter because, for instance, what we're discussing today, the idea of evil proving or disproving God. I don't think it particularly matters how you're defining atheism or Christianity, because what we're trying to talk about is a particular concept. And so for this discussion, I might just be a skeptic, not necessarily an atheist, but I might just be somebody who you are trying to present a worldview to, and I'm just saying, well, let me criticize that and see if I can get some kind of response.
When I've had this conversation on Twitter and on this show with people, sometimes what's emerged is that they will say, they'll go with the atheism is just a lack of belief in God view. But then when you press them a bit, they will come out with other things that they do have positive beliefs about, so that there is no such thing as objective moral right or wrong.
Right.
The universe has no purpose. All that exists is matter and motion, ultimately, and those kinds of things. So do you subscribe in that sense to something like, for instance, materialism, naturalism, and so on?
Well, for me, it's a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
So I wouldn't call myself a naturalist. I wouldn't call myself a materialist, because all of a sudden you're giving yourself a burden of proof. What I would say is, if you pressed me to put some money, I'm not a gambling man, but if I had to put some money on either say Christianity or naturalism, a better explanation for the universe, I'd put my money on naturalism.
Okay.
And so when I have discussions like this, I will argue in that mindset.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to say...
But you're still agnostic, effectively, as to what exactly...
If you're talking about a claim to knowledge, absolutely. I would never be so arrogant as to say that I know that there is no God, or I would never say that I know that there is someone up there, and I know who he is, I know his gender, I know his nature, and I know what his plan is and what he wants for me.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're dealing in the burden. We're dealing more with probability than we are with absolute certainty. And you remember Richard Dawkins famously said this on a scale of 1 to 7, where 1 is I'm sure God exists, to 7 I'm sure there isn't a God. He said I'm a 6.5. To his credit, he says, look, I can't say with absolute certainty there is no God. Okay,
Yes.
so we're all dealing in the realm of probability. So where would you be on that scale?
I'm
Alex?
in the same place as Dawkins. I'm a number 6. He calls it a de facto atheist, which I think is the perfect term for all intents and purposes.
You assume there is no God for all intents and purposes.
For all intents and purposes. What I would say is, rather than I assume there is no God, rather I think that everything seems to work without the assumption that a God is there.
But wouldn't an agnostic be about a 3.5?
Agnosticism, again, is a claim to knowledge rather than to belief. So agnosticism, to me, if you don't call yourself an agnostic, then I can't quite understand what knowledge you have that I don't. I mean, I don't know if you're the sort of person to say, I know there is a God.
Again, it's the realm of probability. Am I
Sure.
absolutely certain? No, I'm
Well,
not
there you
even
go.
absolutely certain that I exist. I mean, I guess I have to exist to say
Exactly.
it.
But
But I mean,
this-
we could be, the famous thought experiment. The
be
universe
an
could have been
award.
created 5 minutes ago.
Sure.
We're an experiment in a scientist's laboratory, and we just have all these memories.
Well,
that
you've
aren't
got
really
people
true.
like Elon Musk who do think
I
that we're
know.
some kind of
Indeed, yes,
artificial
yes.
intelligence.
That's a discussion for another time.
But, yeah.
Right.
What I would say, though, is I like to categorize it, and of course this is, again, semantics. It's just my way of categorizing the
Right.
world. What I would say is, if you think of 4 boxes, like a table, across the top you have theism and atheism, and on the side you have Gnosticism and agnosticism. You say you're not 100% sure that there is no God, so I'd put you in the agnostic box. Then I'd put you across on the theism box because you believe there is a God, and that's where you sit. You're an agnostic theist, as far as I'm concerned. Now, you can reject that label because you might have I know that the word agnostic carries weight, so you might
I think
not
maybe
like
we ought
that.
to stop talking about
Yeah.
labels and start talking about evidence.
Absolutely.
Well,
All right,
maybe,
so-
yeah.
couldn't
Well,
agree
let's move it on. It's been a fascinating discussion so far, talking about the definitions of atheism and agnostics and so on.
This entire back and forth about labels is a smokescreen. It avoids the real issue. There's still no solid evidence for God. Not philosophical claims, not definitions, not wordplay. Actual evidence. In every field where we test reality, physics, biology, neuroscience, natural explanations keep winning. The brain produces thoughts, emotions, and moral decisions. Damage specific areas of the brain and personality and judgment change. That's measurable. There's no sign of a soul or divine input. And the "you need a worldview" argument doesn't hold up. You don't need an alternative explanation to reject a weak one. If someone claims a miracle, the burden is on them to prove it. That's how science works. That's how courts work. Even within Christianity, there's no consistency. Thousands of denominations, different interpretations, contradictions across texts. Matthew 24:34 says, the end times would happen within that generation. It didn't. So when you strip it down, what's left? A claim with no testable evidence, defended by redefining words instead of proving anything real.
But yeah, we should get into the meat of the subject today, which is the question of whether evil is evidence, actually, that God exists counterintuitively. That's the claim in that you sort of sketched out for us earlier on, Frank. So let's move on to sort of the second issue that you bring up in your response video, Alex, which is, well, even if objective morality does exist, why would it be grounded in the Christian God and not something else? Do you want to just explain that out a bit, and we'll see what Frank has to say?
Well, again, this isn't... this is one of the parts of the video that I'm not really making an actual claim, but rather I'm a genuine question. More out of interest than anything is how do you arrive at the Christian God? Although I would say that I might assume that your answer might be something along the lines of, well, this argument just proves a God, and then other arguments prove the Christian God, and that is fine by me. But I wonder, do you think... if you say no to this doesn't disprove your position in any way, shape, or form. But do you think that for objective morality, it must be the Christian God?
No, it could be another God, right? Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's what I was going to say, that there are other arguments. You don't get all the way to the Christian God with the moral argument.
Sure.
But with other arguments, I think, in my opinion anyway, you arrive at the grounding for morality as God, and that God happens to be the Christian God.
Let me put it the other way, I guess, to you, Alex. If objective morality did exist, would it at the very least disprove atheism, which is actually what the title of the video is?
Well, this is a tricky thing because
or naturalism, let's say.
Okay, sure.
So we don't do that same discussion.
Perhaps
okay.
it would be compelling. I would see it as a compelling argument. If you could prove to me that objective morality did exist, I would certainly consider it a good argument for some kind of standard.
Because naturalism would not be able to explain that phenomenon.
Sure. I mean, perhaps it would, and we just don't have an understanding yet. But I would submit that, yes, we do not have, in our current understanding, any way. Sam Harris has tried the moral landscape.
Yes.
What I found is that I don't quite understand what he's getting at, because he says he wants to prove objective morality using science. But what he does is he proves that, objectively speaking, certain moral guidance leads to prosperous societies. But then that's assuming that prosperous societies is a good thing.
He makes the ought-is fallacy, in my opinion. He assumes that what science describes is something we ought to be heading for. And of course, that begs the whole question of his project.
Sure, I think he's a brilliant thinker, but on this issue, I cannot bring myself to agree with him.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I mean, I think we more or less covered that issue, because obviously you're not saying this is a wholesale argument for the Christian God, just part of a cumulative argument.
Right, exactly.
And that point in the video is more for people who were watching, perhaps, who were thinking along those lines.
Sure. Well, look, that's a good point at which for us to take a quick break. And I think it's time to grab the bull by the horns, Frank, and just, again, reiterate why you believe, first of all, that morality does have this objective nature to it, so that there is a real realm of moral right and wrong, good and evil, because fundamentally you're saying if evil does exist, as much as that may be a problem for why a loving God would allow evil, nonetheless it's a signpost that something beyond the material world has to exist to allow this realm of good and evil to
exist. In fact, I think Alex recognizes that signpost, because on his website he rails, I think rightfully, against some of the abuses of the Roman Catholic Church, where he talks about how priests have sexually abused children, and obviously that's a great wrong. But my question is, Alex, if you really think that is a great wrong, why would you deny objective morality? I mean, is that really wrong, or is it just a matter of personal opinion?
Well, I think that we agree in one sense that evil doesn't necessarily disprove God. I'm with you on that. What I would say is to answer your question, objectively, no. It is a subjective thing. Morality, to me, is entirely subjective.
Why do you say that?
Well, because, firstly, a thing to note is that objective morality... Well, let's talk about what objective actually means, I suppose. Objectivity, to me, if you want my definition, would be to say that it is true regardless of human intervention, regardless of human consciousness. For instance, the Earth orbits the Sun. That would be true if all humans disappeared.
Right.
Every single one of them. It would still be an objective fact. But to say that murder is wrong, if every human disappeared, that couldn't still be wrong, surely. That wouldn't that would be a nonsense concept without some kind of human psychology. The only way that you could argue that perhaps it would still be wrong is if there was some kind of transcendent being. But then you need to have that being in order to prove the existence of the objective morality that you're then using to prove the God. So
but what we're doing is we're reasoning from effect to cause, that we have this effect known as this moral law that is pressing on us. And as you admitted in the video, and look, videos, 2-minute videos, 10-minute videos, you can't expound on all the nuances. So if this is wrong, correct me. But you seem to say that we, in fact, I think you quoted, the quote was, let me just quote you accurately on this, because in the video you said this. You said moral truths are so deeply ingrained in us that they feel like they are objective.
Yes.
Right? Okay. So my question is, why would you doubt they're objective if they're so deeply ingrained in us?
Well, because this is where I think Sam Harris is right, in the sense that if you have certain assumptions, so let's say that we could assume that human well-being was a good thing. We'll discuss why shortly, but let's say we assumed that. We could then say that it is objectively true that we should act in certain ways, for instance, trying not to murder people. And that would then become an objective morality.
Right.
So because evolution has instilled within us, through genetics, a drive to stay alive, then we can derive objective moral truths about how we should act in order that complies with this inner nature, which I think has come about through evolution. So even if you don't subscribe to the idea that certain moral actions, such as not killing or not stealing, have come about through evolution, the instinctual nature within us to stay alive causes us to think of those as objective truths. But it's a technicality. So for all intents and purposes, you could say they're objective truths. If you grab 100 people off the street and ask them, is rape wrong? 100 of them will say yes. But that doesn't mean it's objective. I mean, for instance, I put it to you, would you say that chocolate is tasty?
Yeah, I would, but that's a subjective.
Right,
Sure.
sure.
Some people may not like chocolate.
It's subjective.
Yeah.
Oh, so
that's
tar,
a flavor.
So tar can be just as tasty as chocolate. But that's no problem, right? That's no problem whatsoever. So when you say something along the lines of, so morality's subjective. So what Hitler did being wrong was just an opinion. Well, yes, but in the same sense that chocolate tasting as good as tar is an opinion.
See, I think when
it
we
doesn't make a difference.
Well, no, I think it does, because it's much more obvious that, say, sexually abusing children is wrong than atheism's true.
Right.
So why would you say that atheism's true in order to avoid the obvious conclusion that sexually abusing children is wrong? You already know sexually abusing children is wrong. Now, if you want to use an evolutionary argument, the problem is that undercuts everything you think. Because if everything we think is the product of evolution, the product of the laws of physics or biology or whatever it is, then why should we believe anything we think? Forget about morality for a second. Why should we even believe that atheism's true or that Christianity's true? If we're sorry, I'm suffering from jet lag here. If our thoughts are the result of some random evolutionary process, why should we believe anything we think is true?
They keep insisting morality must come from God, but there's zero evidence for that. What we do have is strong evidence that morality comes from human evolution and social behavior. Humans developed moral instincts because they helped groups survive. Cooperation, empathy, and fairness increase the chances of survival. That's backed by evolutionary psychology and behavioral science. You even see this in animals. Primates show empathy, dolphins protect others, and studies on capuchin monkeys show they react negatively to unfair treatment. No religion required. And the attempt to trap atheists by saying, if morality is subjective, then anything goes, is just misleading. Societies create laws and moral systems based on harm, well-being, and stability. That's why things like abuse are condemned globally. It causes measurable harm, not because of a divine rulebook. Even worse, the Bible's moral record doesn't help their case. In Numbers 31, it describes taking young girls as spoils of war. In Deuteronomy 22, a victim can be forced to marry her attacker. That's not objective moral perfection, that's ancient human culture. So after hearing both sides, does morality really need a God? Or can it come from human nature, evolution, and society. Let me know what you think in the comments. I want to hear your perspective. If you found this helpful, make sure to like and subscribe for more breakdowns like this. And this is just part 1 of the debate, so if you want to go deeper into the conversation, check out the next part.